Thank you everyone for joining us for the last traditional session of the CRC Professional Development Conference. You are in Emotional Bootcamp, How to Support Your Community Through Transitions. We have a fantastic presenter for you. It's Ashley Borders. She is with William Peace University and the Assistant Director of Student Involvement. This session is going to talk about how we are constantly going through changes and transitions, and we'll discuss tools to enhance your leadership style in a way that helps your students and staff navigate through those changes. Ashley is going to provide resources and activities to assist you in better supporting your staff and students. So I will go ahead and turn it over to Ashley. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Hi, everyone, and thank you so much for choosing to attend Emotional Bootcamp, How to Support Your Community Through Transitions. As Maura mentioned, today we're going to chat through a few different ways in which you can prepare and support yourself and your community through various transitions in your student's college career and also in your life or in your staff's life. But before we begin, I actually want to give a shout out to Anna Brown, who is the former area coordinator of first year communities at William Peace University. Anna actually reached out to me to co-facilitate this session, and she helped create a lot of the content. However, she is currently transitioning into a new role. So although she can't be here with us today, I wanted to make sure to just shout her out and give her the credit that she deserves for putting in the hard work and thought that went into this session. So before we begin today, this is just an overview of what the session will look like. So we'll begin with introductions, kind of set the stage on why we're talking about this specific topic, the learning outcomes, and then some tangible techniques and resources that you can use. Then we'll have a little bit of a discussion on how to incorporate that into day-to-day work, and then some breakout time to chat with other people and kind of see what specific examples of transitions that you're seeing on your campus and within your students and your staff, and how you go about preparing people for transitions, what's worked and what hasn't, and that sort of thing. And then we will wrap up. So that is a little overview of what this session will look like. So as we get started today, I just want to take a moment for us to get to know one another. So I am Ashley Borders. I use she, her pronouns. I currently serve as the Assistant Director for Student Involvement at William Peace University. I am originally from Kansas City and have now been converted to the North Carolina life. Being from Kansas, you don't really get an opportunity to be close to the beach and the mountains. So I love that. And you can see my academic credentials on the screen, but I want to hear from you all. So if you are comfortable, I ask that you in the chat share your name, pronouns, title, institution, any of that, and kind of what you're hoping to take away from this session. I have content and learning outcomes created, but I also want to make sure that this is serving you in the way that you hope. And if you have any questions throughout the session, please feel free to send them in the chat, and Maura will make sure that I get to them. Even if I'm not able to see them, she will read them out to me. So yeah, I just want to take this moment to kind of open it to you all in the chat and share who you are and why you're here and what you're hoping to get out of this. Hi, Kayla. And hi, Consuelo. Awesome, Allison. Thank you for that. Yes, and we're hoping to give a good overview. When I say we, I mean I'm talking for Anna and I, even though Anna is not able to be here since we created the content together. It just feels right to say we. Awesome, Lorraine. Hoping we can give you some tangible things to take away. Yes, Stacy, we're absolutely consumed with change in higher education, but it'll definitely be a lot more change as we shift back to being on campus and doing the programs that we've done before, and just maybe in a new way. Transitioning back to the workplace overview. Yep, transition through. And that is a good point of just through different situations in life, because although this specific presentation might be targeted towards you working with students, you can take any of this and put it towards working with your staff or even just in your own personal life too. So definitely, although we might be using the language of higher education, a lot of this stuff can be utilized elsewhere as well. So thank you all for sending in who you are, why you're here. I'm definitely enjoying reading about who is here. For the sake of time, we'll go ahead and kind of jump back into the content for today. So kind of setting the stage on why it's important that we're here today. So starting college can kind of be life-changing for a lot of students. It's where they develop independence from family and friends. They leave behind things that have been familiar with them for 18 years. During the experience, students navigate social settings, academic settings, financial stressors, relationships that come and go, job search, study abroad opportunities, leadership roles, internships, and so much more that doesn't even scratch the surface. So I just want you to take a minute and kind of reflect back to your either your first year of college or your first year in a new role or a transition that you went through. And what was it like to start that new journey? And what did you need to be successful? Sort of what you were nervous about and what could have helped you have a smoother transition. And you can either just think that to yourself, write it down. If it's helpful, if you want to put it in the chat just to get the thoughts out there, that works. But I'm just going to pause for a moment for you to sort of think about that. So as you're kind of thinking about that, I hope that that brings some memories or thoughts as you're transitioning into a role or a new stage in your life of what sort of things might have helped you feel more in control as you were in the middle of that transition. So college and life is kind of like a mountain range. We've got highs and lows and moments where we feel like we've kind of plateaued a little bit. And so we want to be able to teach students and really ourselves some techniques on how to cope with these changes and how they can navigate new obstacles that are thrown their way. So before we get into that, just some learning outcomes that we touched on earlier. We hope that you walk away from this session with some tangible resources for implementing one or more of the strategies we covered, as well as gaining information to enhance your leadership skills and implement these practices into your own roles, which we'll do that by sharing those techniques and also connecting with each other and talking through those different things as well. So we have created this chart, and in order for us to help our students through various transitions they face, it's important that we help them understand themselves and how they handle certain things. So there are a variety of techniques that can be used for this type of thing, and this list does not even begin to scratch the surface. We recognize that, but these are some things that Anna and I have tried to put an emphasis on as we are working with student leaders in our positions. So that is what we wanted to share with you because it is what we have kind of what we have covered. So the same can be said for the resources listed on this side, as well as the techniques. These are just to give you an idea of places you can look for these certain things or things that you can do for each of these techniques. So with things like YouTube, it is so easy to find short videos that help guide some of these things or provide more resources. The links that we have provided are not the end all be all of that. And it is super easy to find some smaller things that you can use in your practice. Helping students understand their support network is a great way to help them navigate through transitions. Having students understand where they can go for different types of things will ensure that they are processing thoughts and emotions appropriately while getting the right information and support that they need. So that support network is the second to last one listed, but it's the one that I really like to begin with when I'm working with students to kind of help them understand not only their resources on campus, but also just in everyday life, like who do they go to for certain things. And so like this exercise or the resource states, having students draw out their support network and label the people that they go to and why they go to that person. So for example, I go to John Doe for support when I'm feeling sad because, and it can be for a variety of reasons. Maybe John Doe has a way of just making you feel better generally, but also maybe John Doe is able to provide resources for you to get better help so that you feel better prepared for the situation at hand. Things like mindfulness, meditation, and yoga, I think a lot of times it's hard to do those necessarily with a group of students because for some students, it just won't work. That isn't going to allow them to feel like they are in touch with themselves. But I think it's always good. I like to offer these resources to students that I'm working with individually who maybe are saying that they are going through a stressful time and they just have so many different things on their plate. I know William Peace University is a smaller institution. We often see a lot of the same students in our leadership groups and our student leadership roles. And so when students are feeling very overwhelmed at the amount of things that are on their plate, I like to offer some sort of mindfulness or meditation practice to them to implement into their day so they can feel grounded and kind of start the day or end the day with a better sense of what actually needs to be done, how they can prioritize. So a lot of these techniques that we're giving aren't necessarily supposed to be the cure for to making these transitions easier, but more helping them prepare to go through the transition so that they feel like they can do that themselves. So I hope that that makes a little bit of sense, that these aren't necessarily meant to be the end all be all, but are just there to help you kind of get ideas of what you can provide to students who might be struggling. And for the last technique and resource that's listed, if you're like me, sometimes I don't love the word resilience. I think that it can sometimes be used as a way for us to not necessarily support students because we think that they should be handling something on their own or in a certain way. So when I say resilience, or we have resilience on this sheet, I more so mean as a way for them to reflect on how they conquer roadblocks specifically, and not necessarily us telling them that they should just be resilient and plow through obstacles without fully like recognizing and understanding how that obstacle is affecting us and others, if that makes sense. And so again, the term resilience, I think, can sometimes be used as like, oh, well, just get over it, or do something this way. But that's not really what we mean by resilience. It's more just like having them understand their level of resilience. Like, do they tend to just kind of give up when an obstacle comes their way, or do they tend to kind of shut off and not fully understand their emotions that they're experiencing, which will then later affect them or others negatively in the long run, that type of thing. And so having them assess that themselves with this how resilient are you short quiz. Of course, that quiz isn't necessarily going to be 100% accurate, but is just a little insight. We will also be sharing a copy of this resources guide in the chat. So it's a PDF that you can download and actually click the links that are hyperlinked on here. So you can download that and keep it with you if you would like. I would now love to hear what are some other techniques or resources that you have used that you find helpful for others when preparing students or your staff or just you in general for transitions that are coming their way, whether that's like transitioning out of a student leadership role or transitioning in the beginning of the semester, all these different transitions that students go through. What are some resources or techniques that you have used? Feel free to either raise your hand and we can call on you, or you can type it in the chat and we can read that aloud. Nature therapy. That sounds very interesting. I don't know if I fully know what that is, Jessica, but that sounds very fascinating. What are some other techniques or resources that we can share? Talk through the positives. Yeah, and I think sometimes when we gratitude journals, yeah, I think both of those things can go hand in hand, where sometimes I think that, at least me as a human, sometimes I'm like, but I don't want to focus on the positives. Like, I want to recognize like what is happening to me, but I think that I always feel better after I do that. And it's not to say I'm going to focus on the positives to the point where I forget the difficulties or the hardships that are happening right now, but just to understand that that's not the only thing that's happening in your life, even if it might feel that way, especially as college students as they're navigating some more like typical transitions in school. And so especially like as seniors beginning to graduate and go off into their professional roles, that can seem like, that is very time consuming and very emotionally consuming for students. But most seniors are doing that. So we've seen that and we can help them through that. Yeah, gaming and how it clears your mind. Yeah, I think knowing what works best for you as well. And so you knowing that that is what works for you helps you understand that that's what you need to do, and helping us have students get to that point where they can recognize things that don't necessarily seem like these techniques or resources that we're talking about, but it works for them. And so we're encouraging them to do that. Yeah, and that can be faith for a lot of people as well. And yes, it can be a sticky subject with students, but I think that if you have a relationship with a student and you know that about them, encouraging them in that way, but like you said, not necessarily putting that on students that you don't know that about. Creating checklists and schedules, list making. Yep. I definitely see that for sure in my own, especially in my professional role. Those are things that like immediately, if I can get all my thoughts and all of my to-dos onto a piece of paper, or I personally like to use like the Google task list. If I can do that, I automatically feel like 25% better because I can at least visualize what I need to do. And so same with students as they're transitioning into different roles or transitioning out of roles, having them understand like what they need to do so that they can feel like they're fully either transitioned out and can kind of feel good about that, or that they are prepared to come into this role and what that looks like for them. Or like I mentioned earlier, if we're talking about job searching for seniors, having them kind of create a list of what they're looking for in a job, what are some deal breakers, what are some must-haves, those different types of things that will make them feel more prepared as they're moving through their job search. Yes, and making a list at the end of the day is super helpful so that you're not like, I know sometimes I will like dream of things I need to be doing at work because I didn't write it down before I went to bed, and then it's like consuming me. So definitely like those ideas. So we'll have a little bit more time to share later about some specific things that have worked for you, and we can talk about that more in our breakout sessions, but I really appreciate everyone sharing that stuff in the chat, because I think that everyone operates so differently that it's hard to kind of create a list of like, here are some things that you can do, because you could look at this list and say, none of these things are going to work for me, but you know something that might. And so just kind of encouraging students to look into themselves and see what is going to work for them. So another big thing is like, okay, so now we have these tools and resources, but how can this be incorporated into day-to-day work? And so now, where do we actually bring these resources to life? There's really no wrong answer, but some ideas that we came up with could be in one-on-one meetings with students in a classroom setting, as well as during your staff meetings or training sessions. So even just incorporating, I know that I believe Anna used to do some like meditations with her students in her RA staff meetings and things like that, where you're just starting the meeting off with a little like 5-minute activity, and then you're going about the rest of your business. But it could prep everyone to be in a better headspace, but it doesn't take up that much time in your staff meeting. But each of these meetings on the list here, whether it's a training, classroom setting, one-on-one staff meeting, they have a captive audience where students are coming there to learn or coming there to be productive. So this doesn't necessarily mean that you have to incorporate these into every meeting and you have to start every meeting with a meditation, but maybe like once a month you do that and see if it works. And if it doesn't work for your students, you don't have to continue doing it, because it's all just based off of what is actually showing productivity. And so of course, like I said, you don't have to incorporate these into every meeting, but just in a way that works best for you. And again, that might just be in a casual interaction with a student and not in a set one-on-one time. Awesome. So now during this time, you are going to be split into breakout rooms so that you can kind of talk through and share your own experiences about helping students through transitions. And please feel free to take a picture of these questions so you don't forget. But I just want you all to kind of talk about what has been the biggest transition struggle for your institution or office. So what do you often see happening amongst either staff or students in your office or at your institution when it comes to transitions? And how do you think you might implement any of these or other techniques maybe that you saw in the chat or techniques that you've read somewhere else in your work? And what techniques have you tried? Were they successful? If not, what would you might have changed, or why weren't they successful? So it seems like a lot of questions, so please feel free to take a picture of that, and we will give you about 15 minutes with your group to talk through these things. And if you have any questions beforehand, please feel free to throw them in the chat. Hi, everyone. Welcome back. I think that this should be everybody. I think the breakout rooms ended. But I hope that was helpful to kind of have some time to chat with either people at your same institution or at different institutions about the different transitions that you're seeing on your campus amongst your students or staff, and ways that you go about helping prepare them, or ways that you can be better about helping prepare them. Is there anything that was shared in the breakout rooms that anybody would like to share out, because I thought it was helpful? And you can either unmute or you can put it in the chat.
Breakout room that I joined to kind of join the conversation, everyone in that room actually is no longer in roles that are student front. They're more staff or faculty front. So they're spending less time with students. Can you maybe talk a little bit about implementing some of these on the professional side?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a really great point too. And I think even if we are still student facing, it's important that we focus on our staff members as well. And so I think the same general thing can be said. The transitions will just look different. And so instead of a senior looking for a job, what if we're talking about transition among office in terms of staff members coming and going? Maybe a staff member's just recently got a promotion, and that looks different for staff structure as well. And so I think that the biggest thing that comes from that I will share is that being open and transparent about what you have going on in your role versus and also understanding what the other people in your office are doing, so that you can better accommodate for any transitions that are happening with staff. And so I think that it's important for us to understand what we have on our plate. Sometimes in my one-on-ones with my supervisor, we have to make a list similar to what people were talking about in the chat earlier, so that she can fully understand what I am working on in my role, because we might look at our position descriptions and think, oh, these are just the things that you've going on, but actually there's like so many different micro things happening within all of those responsibilities. And so just being transparent and sharing, especially if you're feeling overwhelmed, having a conversation about that, so that the people that are on your staff can help you through that transition. And so I know that that's a little bit broad, but I do think that even using some of the techniques that were shared earlier at the beginning of staff meeting, or having a similar conversation to what we've had in terms of what other people on your staff do to feel grounded and not feel so overwhelmed, is good for you, whether you are a supervisor or a supervisee, to know of the people that you are working with. Kind of in that same vein, as we transition out of the breakout room time, is there any questions that we have about something that was shared, or maybe something that wasn't shared, that you kind of want some more information on, that might help you leave here feeling like you have some like tangible resources and tips and things?
Well, as people are typing in the chat, or feel free to jump on the mic, I will add one thing that your session kind of brought back to me that I had forgotten about is, sometimes it's really important for your emotional support to set boundaries. And sometimes that can be really difficult, especially when you are working with students, or if student like workers or your staff can see your calendar. So one thing I used to do when I had a very large staff that reported underneath me was there were times that I would put in what I called my meeting with Mr. Smith. And it was a 10-minute block of time that I was, or a 15-minute, whatever I needed for that day. If I had something I had to get done, or even if I just needed a minute to be, I would put in this on I would add it to my calendar at least a couple times a week. So people thought I was meeting and, at that time unavailable, but really it was time for me to recenter. And I'll tell you, it really helped.
Yeah, that's a great tip. I think blocking time on your calendar. I mentioned earlier that I use the Google Task feature. And so when you do that, people can't see that you have something on your calendar, even if it's on yours. And so I've been trying to be better about blocking like administrative time and setting that time so that it shows that I'm in a meeting or busy rather than just open time on my calendar. So thank you for sharing that, Maura. I think that's like a fantastic idea. And setting those boundaries is really important to beginning to do these other things that we've talked about in the session as well. And so for me, that setting that boundary can look like if someone from work texts me about something, sometimes I have to say, can you send that to me in an email? Just because text seems so much more urgent sometimes than they really are. And it's just easier for me to keep up with things when they're in my email rather than in my text inbox. And so that is something that I've had to learn kind of the hard way. And, it has helped a lot. And so I think just some of those smaller things that might not seem like such a big deal can really help set the stage for making your general life a lot easier, especially in work. Any other things that you can think of that any other questions or things that we maybe didn't get to that you want to kind of talk about? I just want to give people a moment to think and just kind of be thinking too about, you don't have to share this in the chat either. If you also want to share it with me privately, that's fine too, about like maybe what was most helpful from this presentation. Like I said at the beginning, it really was meant to be kind of like a broad time for you to kind of think about your specific role and what sort of transitions are happening at your institution or in your role, and how some of these things might relate to it. I know that sometimes when I go to presentations, I'm like, no, I just wish that you could like tell me how to do these things. But this is one of those things that is so specific to every institution and to every role that it was hard for us to kind of compile very specific things, but we hope that the tangible list that we did provide is helpful, or at least sparks conversation amongst either your office or your students. And I will also insert a link to the PDF. Hopefully this link should work to be able to give you access to it, to view it, to where you can download that and save it, or also click on those links that are hyperlinked in the handout and see from there, so you can keep it after this presentation. But I also do welcome any other questions, and my contact information is on the slide if anyone would like to reach out and have further conversations or have specific questions about this specific topic. But I really appreciate you all giving me your time today. And this was my first professional presentation. So thank you all for being along for the journey of that as well. So thank you everyone for your time. And thank you, Maura and the CRC.
Thank you so much, Ashley. We really enjoyed having you today. And thank you so much for those resources. The slides from today's session will be available, as well as the recording, on the CRC website early next week. So if you'd like to access some of the resources that Ashley provided, I'll have those on our website as well.